This is quite sad news.
It is. It is. I think Li Keqiang, only 68 years old, was in Shanghai, apparently suffered a heart attack. And, I would say that the last decade of his life before he stepped down, he was at best the junior partner to Xi Jinping as China's premier and head of the State Council, and was seen as a pragmatist, balancing against Xi, but nowhere near the force of Xi Jinping. And so rarely got his way, was never fully trusted. The news is really shocking.
Can you tell us what he'll be remembered by the most? Obviously, we've called him a technocrat. Obviously, he was someone that really talked about the deep concerns in the economy as well. I mean, what did he exemplify for China?
Sure. I think it's going to be two things, which we might sum up as an untrusted technocrat. He really was still part of the old school of Chinese leadership going back to the 1990s, who had studied engineering or economics, and really was brought into power to provide technocratic leadership to address specific types of economic development challenges. And he really just ran into a buzzsaw with Xi Jinping who decided to take the country in quite a different direction. And so you had this pragmatist trying to keep the economy afloat. In particular, he was very focused on youth unemployment and focused heavily on promoting loans and opportunities for youth to deal with that challenge. Never fully panned out. He was really a person who ran into the transition that Xi Jinping unveiled. I think it also raises the question about Chinese leaders and overall, not just Li Keqiang.
Right, and when at least when he became premier in 2013, and arguably, taking over, an economy that, just wrapped up really, the previous decade leading up to that was, your growth of 10+%. And, it was a different economy that he was then at that point adopting and overseeing. And, the last 10 years have been about, leverage, reform, and just changing just how they manage the economy, from a sort of very centrally planned to something that's a bit more complex. So, Scott, the reason I bring that up is what do you think economically he'll be remembered by? What are the key reforms that you think we can thank Li Keqiang for?
Sure. Well, before he became premier, he was first vice premier. And during that time, China had worked with the World Bank and published a report, the World Bank and a Chinese think tank, about what the next wave of reforms needed to be, the China 2030 report. And many thought that once he became premier and working with Xi Jinping, that they'd implement that report. And they really only implemented very small elements of it. For the most part, moved in a very different direction. And yes, I think he was committed to trying to use data to try and improve the livelihood of Chinese and still expand trade and stabilize markets and be a consistent voice. But everyone knew that he was a far second fiddle to Xi Jinping, and he rarely got his way. And I think partly because of his association with the Communist Youth League, a different faction than Xi. He was really a compromise premier when Xi came into office. And so I think those are the things he's going to be most remembered for. But it really requires us to think about the future as well. Xi Jinping himself is 70. There's always rumors about his health. And it just tells us that in Chinese politics, everything seems like it's going in one direction and is stable, and suddenly it's not.